That was easy. All right. I think
Hey, David, there
there
we
we
go.
go. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing so great. Nice to see you.
Likewise, I just had to pull an audible. I was out back all ready to light up and be ready to go, and there's a guy working on a car literally in the alley behind my house, and it's so
Yeah,
loud. So I'm gonna dry smoke with you inside the house. You're probably gonna light up though, and you've got a smoking room that I do not
yeah.
have.
No, that's great. And this is, hey, this is the new world of Zoom meetings and, Instagram Live. And, this is just the way things are.
It's all right. We're gonna make it work. Anyways, I am so excited to speak with you because this is the first cigar-related thing we've ever done for anything, and we have
Yeah,
such a long tradition of selling cigars at Mission. So we've never done any formal education or any sort of outreach with really cool brands like Fuente and Newman. And so it's great to have you here. And the first thing that I want to ask you, because I've done it wrong 100 times since I've started smoking a cigar, is how are you going to cut the cigar that you're about to light?
yeah. So the long and the short of it is there are a lot of different types of cutters and lighters, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. I don't believe that there's one way. Whatever works for you is great. But having said that, the most common type of cigar, and I'm going to start with this one here, which is a Don Carlos Double Robusto. That's one of my personal favorites. Looked to me like you were going to smoke a Don Carlos as well there, David.
I've got the Hemingway
But
cut
if
that
we
I've
take
circumcised there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So this is a Don Carlos, and if you just look real closely, you'll actually notice that the head—that's the top part of the cigar—the head is slightly rounded. Okay, we like to say that it actually has shoulders, right? As opposed to if you look at the foot, you'll notice it's perfectly straight across, but the head of the cigar actually has a slight roundness to it. So if you take a standard double blade cutter, right? This is one that's made by Zycar, is an example that they made for J.C. Newman's 125th anniversary. And if I take this double blade cutter and I cut just above the shoulders, okay, so just above the shoulders there, what we're left with is an opening that is about 90% of the cigar. So we haven't cut straight across. You can still see the slight shoulders there, but it gives you a cut that's about 90% open, and that's perfect for about 90% of cigars. Of course, when you get into a torpedo or some really exotic perfecto shapes, you're going to make a slight difference. But that cut there, a straight cut with a double-bladed cutter, will work for 90% of cigars out there. And then in terms of the lighting, again, there's no hard and fast rules per se in the cigar business. It's, do what works for you. But having said that, there's a couple of things we got to remember. Number one is these cigars are very sensitive, very delicate. If you use something like this torch lighter, right, kind of your standard torch lighter,
right. That's what I
if
have
you
here.
use this too close to the cigar, you actually will burn the wrapper leaf.
Mm.
It's very easy to burn the really delicate outer wrapper leaf. So what you want to do is keep the cigar at about a 45-degree angle, and you want to light from the bottom so that the heat on the lighter is going straight up into the foot of the cigar. And I actually do it sideways to make it a little easier to see.
Mm. Okay, I'm going to watch you do it first. I've gone with the double V cut on mine because once I discovered that, that was it for me. That looked very, very professional.
Yeah, well, it's not my first rodeo, right? I've done this a few times. But that gives you a general idea. So you might have noticed a couple things. One is I kept the lighter kind of an equal distance away from the bottom of the cigar, and I kind of rotated the lighter around to get full coverage. But the lighter never touched the cigar, and it was never so close or so hot that it burned the wrapper leaf. And then the second thing is after we're done taking a few puffs and getting lit, you blow on the other end to kind of spread that flame out. But
Right.
that's basically it for 90% of the cigars.
So, can you talk a little bit about your experience in the industry? Because you're one of the only people that I know who's worked 25 years in any industry who looks as young as you do.
Yeah, so thank you. That's a very nice compliment. It's the miles, not the years, I'm afraid. But basically, the deal is I was in college at Claremont McKenna College here in Southern California. And right around my senior year or so, I went into my local cigar store. Now, back then in the mid 90s, it was pretty unusual to have someone younger smoking premium cigars that really hadn't quite hit its stride yet. The 90s, the beginning 90s, were part of what we now call the cigar boom. Of course, we didn't know that's what it was back then. Cigar Aficionado magazine was launched in 1992. To give you some idea.
Right.
So prior to 1992, there wasn't really a really nice cigar magazine that had made it. Several had tried and gone out of business or whatnot, but Cigar Aficionado was launched in 92. So by 95, I roll into my local cigar store in Seal Beach, California. There's a help wanted sign there, and I start working part-time minimum wage at my local cigar store just because I love cigars so much. And then one thing led to another, and then I became sort of a manager or assistant manager there, a full-time employee. And then someone came in, one of my friends came in and said, hey, I just talked to somebody who's opening a store in Santa Monica, and they need someone. Will you go interview? And the next thing I know, I'm running that store and then a chain of 3 stores. And then in 1999, I made the jump to work for Arturo Fuente and J.C. Newman, and I've been with them ever since. So this is my 23rd year with the company. But it's been a crazy run. I certainly never expected to be in the premium cigar business. I just started it because I was so passionate. Like so many people actually in the cigar business, it just starts with a passion.
Yeah, that's true. I was all ready to go to law school, and I started working at a wine store part-time, and then here I am 14 years later still working in a wine store. So there you go. What's interesting to me...
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just not to interrupt, but just real quick to add to that, David, I think there's something really kind of beautiful about people that start something not for the money, but start something for the passion, for the love of something, and then later maybe it becomes successful, you know?
Yeah.
Certainly when we get into the history of both the Newmans and the Fuentes, you'll see there were long years, I mean decades, where the family struggled, but they had a passion for making cigars. And of course it's all turned out for the best now, but it was many, many years of struggle fueled by passion.
I've talked to you about this, but I watched that 30-minute documentary about the Fuente family on YouTube that you can find if you just search Fuente cigar history. And that history is the most perseverant family history I've ever seen, where a family can be dealt setback after setback after setback after setback, and like monumental in scale. Like completely wiping out family businesses, completely wiping out infrastructure, military coups, revolution, moving from this country, moving to that country. By the time I finished watching that, I'm pretty sure Fuente became my favorite cigar from a romantic point of view, not just from a qualitative point of view, right?
Yeah, and for anyone that hasn't done that, I really recommend just go to YouTube. Under Arturo Fuente, you're going to find some beautiful videos. And there's another one called Fuente and Marifel, and that is our interview show. So the Marifel family and the Fuente family, the Marifels are the famous family that grows the real African Cameroon wrapper on the cigars that you and I are enjoying today. And them, along with Carlito and Jose Blanco, that works for our company, have a little interview show. And so that's really a great reference, too, for history and knowledge of people in the cigar business as well. But anyway, anyone that hasn't seen the video, just real quick in a nutshell, Arturo Fuente started our company in 1912, okay? Carlos Fuente Sr. bought the company from his father for $1 in 1956. In the 1970s, we were in Nicaragua with a very successful factory. And then, unfortunately, we had a factory fire in Nicaragua and also Honduras. And in 1980, we basically started from scratch in the Dominican Republic all over again. After what is almost 70 years in the business, in 1980, we basically rolled it all in and started from scratch in the Dominican Republic again, now with Arturo Fuente's grandson, Carlito Fuente, or Carlos Fuente Jr. So it's really amazing. And of course, we have the 4th generation of Fuentes, Liana Fuente and her brothers and sisters that are in the family now. Yeah, so 4 generations of Fuentes since 1912, completely family owned.
The part that I know that I've reiterated this to you that made me smile was when the kids, when they came home from school in Florida back in the day, couldn't go out and play until they rolled 50 cigars each. And, they're like 10 years old and they got to go inside and roll 50 cigars before they can go out and play. I had to empty the dishwasher and then I could go out and play. But you're
Yeah.
never going to compete professionally with somebody who has that kind of experience and that kind of family background. I just feel like the Fuente family has been making sure that every subsequent generation is, completely indoctrinated and brought into the fold. Which it's not like some of these other family businesses where, like the guy reluctantly stumbles into the job because he couldn't find a real job on his own, and he just did it because it was free
Right.
money. And I know those people. This is like a real legacy
Yeah.
of very passionate people who have it in their blood.
Yeah, so the Fuente story is a genuine story. It's a real story of struggle and overcoming and passion, and that's, you just can't replicate that. Now, that's not to take anything away from our friends and competitors in the industry, because many of whom make wonderful cigars, and we're not here to criticize them. But the Fuente story is really quite unique. And to your point, it is really true that when Arturo Fuente was really struggling, his first factory burned down. And when he was working for another factory to pay off all of his creditors, which he did, by the way, he paid off every single creditor that he had, even though his factory burned down the first time. But during that period, they literally would come home from working a full shift at a cigar factory. Him and his family and friends would move all of the furniture in the house out on the lawn. They would then roll cigars in the living room of the house, okay? And then at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, they would bring all the furniture back in and then repeat the process 7 days a week. So, I mean, they really, when you're willing to work that hard, when you're committed that much, there's nothing that's going to stop you.
Agreed. So I want to open up a floodgate here into something that has parallels to the spirits industry as well. And just to sort of put a precursor on that, when I got into the booze business, a lot of what I started doing was traveling around the world and trying to import things or purchase spirits or barrels or casks or tanks of alcohol that normally you couldn't find in California. And are you there? I saw that you reset. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, no, sorry about that.
Now, so of course, once we started bringing rum in, the number one question was, can you get Cuban rum? Can you get Cuban rum?
Sure.
And, we finally did. We finally did get Cuban rum. And when we got it, it was sort of like, yeah, it's good. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't the best rum I'd ever had. And so when I first started bringing in, when I first started purchasing cigars for myself, since we're getting ready to ship cigars here at Mission, I wanted to order cigars from other stores around the world and see how they packed their cigars. So I was able to send in some Cubans, and I had them, and I thought they were great. They were mellow and complicated and sometimes not so complicated, and they all smoked beautifully. But I didn't think they were of another ilk, far and leaps and bounds above what I had been smoking from the Dominican Republic, or Honduras, or anywhere else, or Nicaragua. And so how do you think, in your professional opinion, that the evolution of the tobacco industries in these other countries has evolved over the last few decades? And where do you think qualitatively the best tobaccos are coming from currently?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I would actually go back a little bit and beyond just the cigar business. I think you and I were talking about this at Mission when we ran across each other a couple weeks ago, and there was a time about 100 to 150 years ago when global trade was really just starting in a large way, and all you needed to know about a product was where it came from to kind of know the quality. So, for example, if I was a brandy drinker and my local store got in a cask of brandy that was made in Cognac, France, that was the only label I needed to know that it was going to be fantastic brandy, because Cognac made the best brandy in the world, right? And Portugal made the best fortified red wines, right? Port became the synonymous word. And for tobacco, Cuban cigars became the word. So before name brands even existed, if I had a case or a barrel of thousands of cigars made in Cuba 100, 150 years ago, that was the only thing I needed to know that they were of highest quality, right? That's the way things were sold back then, is where they were made. Colombian coffee. I could go on and on and on. Many of these things we associate even today really come back from that time when origin was such a big deal, right? So fast forward a little bit, now we get into sort of branding and the more modern world in the 20s, 30s, 40s. There's no question that two places in the world dominated cigar production. Number one was Tampa, Florida, okay, which was known as Ybor City. That's the section of Tampa that makes cigars, and Havana, Cuba. Those two places accounted for an incredible quantity of cigars, particularly before the invention of the cigarette making machine, when the most portable form of smoking tobacco was a cigar. Yeah. So between Ybor City and Tampa and Havana, Cuba, they made a tremendous number of cigars. So there really wasn't a major cigar production in terms of the percentage of the industry outside of Cuba or the United States. Certainly Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, Honduras, the Canary Islands in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, with a few exceptions, weren't really making cigars in a large quantity. Yeah. But then something very important and dramatic happened, and that is the Cuban embargo, the American embargo of Cuba. Okay. And when that happened, it became illegal for the United States, the largest cigar consuming market in the world, to import anything from Cuba, whether it's Cuban rum or Cuban tobacco or Cuban cigars. And of course, at the time, we didn't know how long the embargo would last, right? Mm-hmm. So we went right on making 100% Cuban cigars in the United States. But then at some point, as the Cuban tobaccos ran out, set in, manufacturers look for other places to make premium cigars. And at the same time, you had an exodus of cigar makers leaving Cuba as well, right? So you had this exodus of cigar makers where the Cuban government had taken their factories and farms, and then you had cigar companies looking for other places to have their cigars made. And that's when you saw cigars go to the Canary Islands off the coast of Spain, Nicaragua, Honduras, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic. Yeah.
And
then over those years...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. There's a lag every now and then, and I think you're stopping, but you're in mid sentence. And that was the case.
No, I apologize.
No. It's not your fault. That's the case, though. That when the Fuente family came over, they brought tobacco with them, like 5 years worth or whatever years worth, right? When they first came to Tampa.
Yeah, so you have to understand when Arturo Fuente left Cuba in 1906 and went to Key West, Florida. That's where his first stop was. He was was incredibly hardworking and really started with nothing. I mean, really absolutely started with nothing. Worked at some factories in Key West for a few years before he moved to Tampa, because Ybor City was really the place to be if you're going to make cigars. Right. And so really started with very, very humble beginnings. But anyway, I was just going to say, so here you have the 1960s, 70s, 80s, all of these factories in other countries are starting to get rolling, and the more they make cigars and the more experience they get, and the more those countries develop their own cigar culture, the better the cigars become. Then in 1992, as I mentioned, Cigar Aficionado magazine drops and starts rating cigars from all over the world. And very, very quickly, it becomes clear that in these blind taste tests, Cuban cigars do well, but non-Cuban cigars do just as well or better. And then, of course, by the 90s, you have that cigar boom, and the production of cigars in Dominican Republic and Nicaragua in particular just goes through the roof. And the quality of the cigars and the tobaccos being used and the creativity is unleashed. And now we have a situation where it's extremely rare for a Cuban cigar to win Cigar of the Year anymore, or to really even be in the top 25 of 25 best cigars by Cigar Aficionado every year, or European Cigar Journal, or Cigars and Spirits magazine. Smoke. There's many great cigar magazines out there. But if you look at these lists, 23 out of 25 cigars are all non-Cuban.
Right.
Yeah.
I have found that the thing that I really love about the Arturo Fuente, and especially the Gran Reservas and the Don Carlos, is the Cameroon wrapper. And when I was looking at, why a cigar may or may not taste the way that it did, I started to identify the three parts of the cigar, right? The binder, the filler, the wrapper, and I tried to find different combinations of different origins, maybe a pure cigar that was all from one origin, and then try to understand those flavor differences. And recently, I was smoking only Connecticut shade wrappers to try to get my head around that. But I always come back to this. I come back to this every time because it's so delicious. Can you speak a little bit about the Cameroon wrapper and how that got started and why that's such a big part of the Fuente line?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you imagine a scale, right, with really, really light flavors on one end of the scale and really, really strong flavors on the other end of the scale, right? And we might say on the light side would be things like Connecticut shade wrappers, okay, which is generally very light, or a Sumatra or an Indonesian wrapper. And then all the way on the other side might be really heavy wrapper leaves like some Maduros, some Corojos, Cuban seeds, things like that. But they have pluses and minuses, right? The milder ones tend to have a wonderful aroma and flavor, but maybe not quite as flavor, but the aroma can be more muted, or it's overly sweet for some palates. Cameroon is that perfect middle ground, whereas a little of everything has a lot of aroma, has a lot of natural sweetness in the leaf, but also has a lot of flavor and taste, some saltiness. You know, like if you have followers that are fans of, say, Isla whiskeys, and they like that salty, briny taste, you taste that in a Cameroon wrapper. And so it's that perfect middle wrapper, okay? So now why doesn't everybody use it? If it's so great, if it's so wonderful, why doesn't everybody use it? And the problem is Cameroon wrapper is extremely rare and delicate. It's very difficult to grow, to work with. You got to know how to use it, how to age it, the exact right time to roll it. It's very delicate. There's a lot of reasons why Cameroon is very, very difficult. And basically, Arturo Fuente is the one company that has continued this commitment and tradition to the Cameroon wrappers grown in Africa by the Marifel family. Yeah. Not Cameroon seed grown somewhere else, right? But real Cameroon grown in Africa. And we just think it's the heart and soul, really, of our company.
That's a really interesting story in itself as well. The fact that that industry was kept alive by one family who basically braved the wars of Cameroon when the French pulled out and they thought the whole industry was going to go belly up. And you've got one guy and his family in there basically going in between the tanks and the soldiers and keeping the Cameroon wrapper industry alive. I mean, the whole history of everything that's involved with Arturo Fuente is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And for anybody who hasn't gone down that rabbit hole, I implore you to do so because it is hours and hours worth of just fascinating history.
Yeah, it's really great. There's obviously layers and layers and layers. And basically in the cigar business, I think when you stop learning new things is really when you stop looking. Because if you just keep looking, you're gonna learn new things all the time.
What's something new that you've learned, like maybe in the last few years that you didn't know that like surprised you or caught you off guard? Is there anything?
Yeah, so I got really lucky. My last visit to the Dominican Republic and to visit the Fuente factory was just before the COVID pandemic outbreak. So it was January of last year. And wow, it was incredible. First of all, to see our new 69,000 square foot state-of-the-art box factory be completed and just start being built. We can talk a little bit more about that later, but that's a whole world in and of itself, is the packaging, the bands and the boxes for these incredible cigars. But to get a chance to see that and to walk around the factory and, for example, this cigar that I'm enjoying right now is called the Don Carlos Double Robusto. And it, over the years I've changed a lot, but this became my favorite cigar, one of them in the last couple of years. And so I said to Carlito, I want to actually go talk to the rollers that make these cigars. Can you show me in the factory the person or two people that make just this cigar? Wow. And I want to observe that for a little bit. And so to go to the factory and actually see the cigars being made, seeing the different types of filler tobaccos that go into it, how delicate they are with making the product was really nice. And of course, to smell the tobacco before it's rolled, and then to go to the aging room and see how it smells during the aging and after the aging process. Because for most of us as consumers, we only get to smell the finished product, right? But there's a whole lot of evolution that happens between when the tobacco is and you're lighting up that cigar, going to it to barrels, and it's a little bit like taste. 3 years in, 8 years in, and then finally here's 12 years, something that tastes like what you're used to buying at the store. It's just like that with cigars.
That's something that was news to me as well. I'm always looking for parallels to explain things to whiskey drinkers or to wine drinkers. And if you have things that are aged, that's obviously the easiest possible parallel, because that's where a lot of value, or dollar for dollar worth, comes in. If something's been aged longer, it's obviously either rarer or worth more money because of the time it took to make it. And that's a big part of tobacco leaves as well, right? It's the maturation of the leaves for years and years sometimes, right?
Yeah, and I think that if I could give everyone just one thing to really remember and hold on to, okay, more age is not always better.
It's the same as
tobacco
whiskey.
is a natural product, and just like wine or cheese or whiskey, there is a little bit of age that improves the characteristics that you like and minimizes the characteristics that are less desirable to a peak. And then beyond that, even the characteristics that you like start to fade. And so the real trick with making consistent, and we can talk about that later, but that's honestly the hardest thing to do, is to make consistent cigars. Making good cigars is a challenge. Making consistent cigars is almost impossible, right? But to do that, the real secret is to know when to use each leaf at its peak and not to hold them or not to run out. So you've got to have enough inventory to not run out, but you have to use everything at its peak. And that's the problem. That's really one of the biggest challenges.
That's really fascinating. It's almost like you're a cook and you've got food that has to be cooked at its ripeness but you can't buy too much or it spoils.
That's right.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about.
That's one of the best analogies. I really think it is a lot like cooking.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're like a chef. You're like a cigar chef. Tell me a bit about, before we finish up, tell me a bit about the new factory in the Dominican Republic and how you think that's changed things or enhanced things for the company.
Yeah, so one of the things that we almost take for granted, right, is how beautifully packaged a box of cigars are. In the case of like a Hemingway or a Don Carlos or a Diamond Crown, there are these beautiful wooden boxes with beautiful designs on the top. There is a shiny finish to the wood. You open it inside, there's beautiful velvet inside, brass hinges, beautiful ribbons, right? But all of that is made by hand, one at a time, by an army of artisans. And one of the biggest challenges for so long for Arturo Fuente was we would have cigars, but to coordinate all of the packaging and boxes. And importantly, the vision that Carlito Fuente had, the genius of what he wants the box to look like, were held back by his inability to get the boxes he wants, when he wants them, the quantity he wants them. So one of the biggest substantial investments the company made a couple years ago was to break ground and build a 70,000 square foot state-of-the-art factory directly across the street from our cigar factory, where we make all of our own boxes in-house. So when you pick up a Hemingway box, that was made by Arturo Fuente in our box factory, and it walked across the street and got filled with cigars. Yeah, that's really an incredible thing. Not only the artistry of the boxes themselves, but to be able to do it in such a way now that we can, continue to make consistent manner cigar.
Well, that's amazing. The thing that I wanted to share too, and my favorite thing that I've had so far, is all of the cool Arturo Fuente stuff you can find if you just look online, like really cool Arturo Fuente cigar ashtrays.
Yes.
And I don't know,
That's
I'm sort of obsessed with just the whole lore and the romance of the brand and the history of it and the flavor and everything about it. To me, it's I'm still somewhat new to this, and I'm sure I'll evolve over time, and I'll find other brands and other cigars that I like to smoke. But for right now, this is my number one, and I just keep coming back to it over and over again. So thank you for coming here today and sharing some of your knowledge with us and the stories about the brand, because I think other people will be inspired as well.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. It's just a wonderful company to work for. The Fuente and Newman families. It's just been an honor, and they're great people, and they're fascinating, and the stories have so much passion behind them.
Amazing. Well, I'll be in touch because I want to do this again and do the Newman cigars next time. Since we spent this whole time talking about Fuente, I want to do some studying and then catch up with the Newman and then spend the next half hour talking about that. So we'll do that maybe next time around. I'll reach out to you personally, though.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right, Michael. Thanks again.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. Bye.